Hello, welcome back, or welcome if you are new. I am Lizzie. Today we are going to read the story of Clifford House. Sadly, I'm not sure who it's by because the author chose to leave it as written by anonymous. All I can tell you is it was written in 1878. Maybe you can do some more research and see if you can figure out where it came from because I'm not entirely sure. I tried to search, but I really didn't find anything because the person just didn't leave their name. But it's called The Story of Clifford House. This story I will tell you now, as I have promised to do so, and yet I can hardly make you believe in the reluctance with which I even allow my thoughts to go back to the time which I spent in that house, my first own residence after I was married. I have wished so much to go to town that spring, grown tired of my lovely country home, I suppose. Tired of wide lawns and quiet glassy ponds and streams bordered by luscious blooming rhododendrons, of silent mossy avenues, glorious with the flickering light that stole through pale green beech leaves, of rose gardens with grassy paths jewel sprinkled with the shell-like petals of white, crimson, pink, and cream-like hues, of old-fashioned rooms with narrow mullioned windows embowered in scarlet japonica and fragrant starry jasmine. I suppose I had grown tired of them all, and I begged George to see about getting a nice house in town for the season. George saw about it. He wrote one letter from my dictation to a house agent, and answered one advertisement and yawned and grunted for a week afterwards about the bore of the things. Of course I had to make him accompany me to town and to the house agent's and to the house too, let him smoke and yawn as much as he liked. I was determined to take a house, and take a nice one as well. We had looked at, George said, 14, but in fact 7 or 8 houses, I think, before we saw Clifford House. I had found out a new house agent's office, and this was the very first house we were shown, pressed upon our notice, too, by the enthusiastic encomiums of the side house agent. It was certainly a very fine house, both as to exterior and interior appearances, large, massively built, agreeably darkened in woodwork and masonry by time's shading brush, in excellent repair, and the locality all that could be desired. Wide, lofty apartments, staircases, and landings, a handsome dining room paneled in velvet dark green flock and gold, and gold, a handsome drawing room paneled in the pale cream color and gold, airy bedchambers and dressing rooms, one in particular, attached to what seemed the principal bedroom, with a vast mirror occupying the whole side of the apartment, which was opposite to the door leading into the bedchamber. "What a nice dressing room!" I exclaimed, having a weakness, I confess, for large handsome mirrors in the rooms I inhabit. George says impertinent things about my wish to see much of myself as I can. I know I am not tall, in fact rather what he should call petite, if he wished to be polite. But that is not my reason for liking a large mirror. As I spoke the words, I looked about mechanically for the house agent's clerk, who had been sent with us, a nervous-looking little man with a pasty complexion and orange-colored hair meekly plastered down at each side of his face. He had made untiringly, trotting up and down stairs, unlocking doors, answering questions, and keeping up a harmless soliloquy of chatter about the beauties and excellencies of the mansion, as he called it, ever since he entered its doors, but now he was nowhere to be seen. "What door have you opened?" I said, speaking aloud to him, for suddenly a cold blast of air swept up the wide staircase and into the dressing room, making me shudder. "No door, ma'am, not one indeed," said the little clerk, hurrying to the dressing room door, but not entering. His face looked whiter than before, and in this accent there was an almost terrified earnestness that puzzled me. The shadow of the afternoon seemed to deepen the aspect of the suites of rooms and long silent corridors, with their doors ajar as if unseen inhabitants were stealthily crouching behind them, drearily impressed me with a sense of dull desolation, and it was with a sudden sensation of childish fear and loneliness that I rushed after my husband and took his arm as he hastily descended the staircase. "A spacious, handsome staircase, George," I remarked. "Yes, and a spacious, handsome rent, you may be sure," George responded. But in this particular he was exceedingly, and I agreeably responded. But in this particular he was, I just read that. The rent was but £150 a year. When judging from the situation and appearance of the house, our lowest estimate has been double that sum. "How cheap!" I whispered. "A screw loose somewhere," was George's oracular response. He repeated his opinion to the clerk in more business-like expression, to the effect that the rent seemed low, and that he trusted there was no peculiar, drains, gas, water, all right, sir. Right as a trivet, sir," said the clerk, looking over his shoulder oddly as he spoke. "Chimneys, ventilators, roof, tiles, everything in the perfectest repair and order, sir." "Hum," said George, with a frown of thoroughly British dissatisfaction. "Unpleasant neighbors, then?" The little clerk coughed violently and buried his nose and eyes in the depth of a red cotton handkerchief. "Neighbors? Disagreeable, sir? Ah, dear me, beg pardon, sir." A little cough. "No, indeed, sir. Miss Carmichael, very high lady, very rich, widow of young Mr. William Carmichael. Just opposite, sir. Old Lady Broadley, within 2 doors, Sir Thomas." "Oh, very well," said George impatiently. "Come, Helen." Nevertheless, I was rather surprised to see how many faces were clustered at the windows of our aristocratic neighbors' houses, and with what intently curious looks they watched our exit and departure, as if visitors or would-be tenants for Clifford House were some very wonderful people indeed. How wonderful or not, the house seemed all that we could desire. The lowness of the rent made it a decided bargain. The season was advancing. Our low-ceiled country rooms seemed contracted, old-fashioned, and shabby, after those lofty, handsome suites of the apartments, and in 3 weeks huge furniture vans and a clever upholsterer had carpeted, curtained, and furnished our town mansion from garret to basement, and George and I, our 2 babies, a nurse, 2 maids, a cook, and a butler were installed in Clifford House. Dear George had been very generous, nay, almost extravagant, in his provisions for the comfort and pleasure of his wife and children, and my dressing room and their nursery were fitted up so luxuriously and tasteful that my feelings at the first inspection of them was that of self-gratulation on being such a fortunate woman, in having such a home, such babies, and such a husband. I arrayed myself for dinner, and that evening, quite gleefully, standing before my splendid mirror amid the blue drapery, I still can't talk, cushions, and couches of my charming dressing room, I put on George's favorite dress, a bronze brown lustrous silk with sparkling old ornaments. He invariably kissed me when he saw it on, stroked me down, stroked my brown curls and brunette face, and called me Maid Marian, and was still standing before the glass smiling at myself like the happy, foolish little woman I was, when I perceived to my discomfiture that George was standing in the doorway watching my doings, the grinning very visibly under his mustache. Stop. Don't mind me, my dear, I beg. Don't mind me in the least. But when you have done admiring Miss George Russell, perhaps you will be kind enough to let me know. Then, suddenly changing his tone, he exclaimed, "Have you the window open, Helen, this chilly evening?" "No, George," I replied, glancing at it to make sure of the fact. "Change in the weather, then?" my husband said. "Come, Helen, there is no use in making yourself any prettier." He had just uttered the last words when I saw him spring aside suddenly and look around. "What is the matter?" I said. "George dear, what is the matter?" For his face had grown quite white, and with his black back against the wall, he was staring about him wildly. "I don't know, Helen. Something," he ejaculated in a low tone. Then recovering himself with a laugh, he cried, "I struck myself against the door, I suppose. I declare, one would think I was composed of old china or wax or sugar candy. It hurt and stunned me so. Come, dearest." He had not struck himself, for I had been watching him going out on the lobby, and I felt an uneasy conviction that he knew he had not done so, and only spoke as he did in order to deceive or satisfy me. Why did I think so? As I live, I cannot tell why I thought so then. I know now. We had the babies, as George always called them, and with the dessert, after the time-honored fashion of making olives as well as olive branches of them. And then, when the little ones had gone to bed, we sat side by side in the summer twilight, I lazily fanning myself, George bending over me like the lover husband he was. Then came the lamp, and I played for him, and we sang duets and spent as happily an evening in our new home as a married pair could wish to spend. I cannot tell why I felt so disinclined to go upstairs that night, tired as I was too, for we had had a long journey up from the country. However, as 11 struck, I routed George out of the easy chair where he had been indulging in a preliminary doze, and ringing for my maid, went up to my dressing room. I like gas in my dressing room, though not in my bedroom, and the globes of either side the great mirror were a blaze of light. As I entered, I caught the reflection of a woman figure in the depth of the glass. Not my maid's. The glimpse I had was of a tall woman, strongly built and broad shoulders, a quantity of light hair hanging in a disordered manner on her neck, and the profile of a white, hard, masculine face, with a clean, glittering eye turned watchfully towards the door. This may seem an elaborately detailed description for the momentary glance I obtained, but it is well known with what lightning. Rapidly the organs of vision will, in a moment of terror and amazement, convey impressions to the startled brain, impressions accurate and indelible. I had taken but one step. On entering the next step, the figure had vanished, and the mirror reflected but my own terrified face and the homely, cheerful one of my maid Harriet, as she stopped over the dressing table opening a jewel case. I dropped down on the nearest chair, and in answer to the girl's alarmed question, replied that I did not feel very well. I was sick and shuddering from head to foot. Suddenly it flashed across me that it was from a similar cause I had seen my husband's face grow ghastly, and that strange, terrified look come into his eyes. He who had been a soldier and unflinchingly had fought amidst the dead and dying on bloody Indian battlefields, almost boy as he was then, what was it? What had he seen? Nonsense! Was I going to believe I had seen a ghost? Nonsense 1,000 times over. I heard my husband's cheery voice as he ascended the stairs, and quite angry with myself for giving way such folly, I threw on my dressing gown, and snatching up the brush from Harriet, I pulled my hair down and brushed it quite savagely until my head ached. Well, for punishment. So she punished herself by roughly brushing her hair. So you all know. Just so we're clear. If the bright morning light disperses sweet illusions formed overnight, as people say it does, it disperses gloomy ones as well, with the warmth and brightness of the unclouded summer sun streaming in through softly colored blinds, bringing out the velvety green of soft new carpets and lounges, the rainbow tints of glittering chandeliers, vases, and ornaments, the gilding on bright, fresh wallpaper, and the spotless folds of snowy window drapery. It was impossible for any instant to connect anything dark or dismal with Clifford House. Why, my dressing room, even where I had been so silly last evening, was like a woodland bower, with its deep purple blue hangings and rose painted china flower vases filled with banquets from our banquets, bouquets from our country home, clustering fragrant honeysuckle, half-open moss roses, drooping emerald green fern, and masses of delicious jasmine dropping its overblown blossoms on the white toilet cover, lace flounced and tied with blue ribbons as Harriet delighted to have it. But we are going to stop there. So far, she has actually seen a ghost of what she would consider a very masculine featured woman with long light colored hair that goes probably to about maybe here. And apparently her husband was the first to see something ghastly but tried to cover it up and lie to her. And she noticed that, but she's denying the fact of any ghost being. So we will be back with the next part, and hopefully my cats will please stop that. So we will be back, and we will read the next part of this.